You like how this tastes?
Wish we could go back to a simpler time. A simpler time when Mike Zimmer was botching the line in the locker room after the Vikings won 3 straight division games. But here we are after a devastating loss to the Cowboys. It's Purple Daily, Mackey and Judd, Declan producing, and Tuesdays are our football nerd stat segment of the week where we bring out various statistics and trends and numbers and we try to make sense of them. And we thought, let's bring in someone who knows this stuff way better than we do. Pro Football Focus's Eric Eager and friend of the show. Eric, there are so many things to get into here with you. How are you today?
I'm doing well. I mean, there was a fun week of football. You got, Sunday night was a magnificent game. Last night was a little, rough on the eyes, but it was a close game at least. Thursday night was cool as well. Obviously, the purple didn't come through, but, that is to be expected, I think. So, not bad.
Let's throw this one out first here. Judd and I both have a ton of statistics in terms of like the Vikings in the fourth quarter and late in games, but the first number I want to throw out is the fourth quarter comeback thing. And again, people always hammer us because we're hard on Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins played a great game on Sunday. And like of the laundry list of reasons why the Vikings lost that game, Kirk Cousins is not anywhere near the top of it. On the last couple of drives, just doing some digging on this here, there have been 168 fourth quarter comebacks in the NFL regular season over the past 3 years, according to stathead.com. 168. The Vikings have one of them. They just don't, like, people are, well, but the defense gave up leads. Get that. The defense was terrible. The run defense, all those things are true. We'll get to all those things. But in the NFL, and Eric, you correct me if I'm wrong here, but in the NFL, most games come down to a quarterback has the ball with a chance to win or tie, and an offense has the chance to drive down the field. And the Vikings had that chance again, even though they blew a couple fourth quarter leads. They had that chance again on Sunday. Justin Jefferson drops a pass. Dalvin Cook can't really be used because you're not handing off. And they look nothing like the offense we saw in the first 2.5 hours of real time. What do you make of their inability to function offensively in the later stages of these games?
Yeah, it's just, I sort of take the good with the bad. I mean, on Monday night, a week ago, Cousins was like 10 of 11 for, perfect passer rating on third down. And Justin Jefferson was 5 for 5 for 102 yards. He had like 35 more receiving yards on third down than any other wide receiver in the NFL that week. And that's noisy. And of course, people who want to paint the Vikings as a good team will say, oh, no, that's just them being clutch. That's a fundamental part of them being clutch. And then we look at the game on Sunday when you have receivers dropping balls, you have, Kirk Cousins not really performing that well early in the game, or the offense not performing well early in the game, performing great in the middle parts of the game, and then petering out at the end. They say, oh, well, that's just noise. And it's like, well, no, all these things are kind of noisy. And, I come back to, what position were you putting yourself in that game? And like, it paints like Dallas is one of the worst defenses, not only in the NFL this year, but in league history. And to go into halftime with just 7 points in that game, and I know some of that was turnovers, and Kirk probably should have gotten a penalty called on his fumble, but that can't be ignored. The fact that they're even in a close game with that team, quarterbacked by Andy Dalton at home, it's probably more of an indictment than anything that really happened at the end of that drive. And I think that's sort of emblematic of the Vikings, right? Like, they're good enough to extend against teams like Detroit, against teams like possibly Chicago. And then when it gets close, like, if Will Fuller doesn't let that ball hit the ground in Houston, they're probably in overtime, right? Like, they've had the good, they've gotten the good and the bad at end of games this year. And I think part of, that's a lot of it is noise, but then you wonder, why are they even in this position in the first place? And it's because they don't necessarily play as good as expected most games.
So from a standpoint too of the execution of what this offense wants to do, here's my point and question as well. The post-bye week formula for Kubiak and Zim is very clear, right? Dalvin, and then play action, and then Kirk. Then Kirk has a chance to beat you because Cook is so good. But Chicago figured it out. They couldn't win. And Dallas did the exact same thing to me. And that is, okay, we'll stop Dalvin. We'll keep the game close. And we're not going to stop him completely, but it's going to be close. And then at the end, we will force Kirk to try and beat us. And Kirk can't. And I think a point that you made on Twitter post-game is that Dalvin really can't be used because you can't like hand him the ball trying to drive down the field late. And so the Vikings plan is clear now, but the opponent's plan is clear too, which is, okay, Kirk, I dare you to beat us. And that's a situation in which Kirk, I think, would almost admit is probably not ideal for him.
Yeah, and that's really the issue. I mean, the Vikings have had this since Adrian Peterson too, where you're at the end of the game and your best player, and later on in his career, your highest paid player is on the bench in favor of Chester Taylor or Toby Gerhart or something like that. And it's because and maybe this speaks to this point, and that why are they bad at end of games? Well, they're playing left-handed at the end of a game. During the game, they like to be in this sort of run the football, play action pass, throw on third down, and hopefully the number of third downs are few. But at the end of the game, like all that pretense goes away. And it's one of the reasons why, I wasn't that high on the team this year, because when you just looked at their schedule, there was a better than, average chance that they would get behind against, the Rodgers of the world and the Matt Ryans of the world and Russell Wilsons of the world, and they wouldn't be able to play that offense for the majority of the game the way that they did against the Chase Daniels and the Matt Moores and all the backup quarterback David Blouses that they played last year. And playing left-handed sort of is out of character there. It's why you got our friend Sage Rosenfels, for example, can look really good in getting ahead against the Colts, for example, in his famous game. But by the time that they get behind, right, it's a totally different offense. And we've seen that, Matt Schaub melted down once that team around him became, less good, right? And they're playing incrementally more from behind. Well, he looks like a Pro Bowl quarterback when they're always playing from ahead. I think Kirk is kind of in that realm. He played terrifically on Sunday, but he was expected to. I mean, when you look at the Dallas Cowboys gave up 153 rushing yards to the Rams, 307 rushing yards to the Cleveland Browns, 261 rushing yards to Arizona, 208 rushing yards to the Washington football team. And they come in and they make stopping the run a focus against the Vikings. And any offensive coordinator worth his salt plays a different game plan. Last night, the Rams had a lead against Tampa Bay, a 7-3 team at halftime, and they had 5 rushing yards the whole first half because they knew they weren't going to get anywhere running the football, and they had to play the pass. And that's with a quarterback who's kind of Kirk-like in Jared Goff. So, a lot of this is the issue with the Vikings is just the way that they're constructed, and Kirk is part of that construction. So even when he plays well, it's sort of a self-own for the Vikings because of the way that they're built. They still can't win in many cases.
Let's keep this conversation about how would you continue to build, because there are a lot of things to build off of. If you're the Vikings, you've got Justin Jefferson has merged into the star player. There's a couple players on defense that weren't going to get playing time, that DJ Wanham, guys that are showing that they can be relevant. And so I want a mock. I want to continue this building conversation, and I have a mock draft in front of me. And by the way, this mock draft is brought to you by Federated Insurance. I want a mock, brought to you by Federated Insurance, helping local business owners since the early 1900s. They've been around about twice as long as the Vikings have been breaking all of our hearts here in the state of Minnesota. You can follow them on Twitter at FederatedINS for fresh, relevant risk management content. They're also a proud supporter of Gophers Athletics. So federatedinsurance.com if you're a business owner and you want some more peace of mind, more protection. And remember, at Federated, it's always our business to protect yours. Right now, according to the latest mock draft on CBSSports.com, this was posted 4 hours ago as we sit and record this, the Vikings have the 13th overall pick, and they are projected to take Northwestern offensive lineman Rashawn Slater.
I want a mock.
And there's another Tankathon. Declan had them taking, which quarterback?
Zach Wilson.
Zach Wilson?
Yep.
So Eric, if you are the Vikings right now and you're looking at all the different ways you could build off of whatever you have right now, would you look and say, all right, the defense has holes and you need another pass rusher and you could maybe use some help in different areas, behind the defensive line. Would you look and say, boy, if you could just fix that offensive line a little bit more, Kirk would have more time to throw and operate? Or would you look at the head of all of it, at the quarterback, and say, boy, if there's a talented young quarterback, like, how would you build off of what they're doing here?
This is where it gets really hard because, and I have to, remember our friends at Over the Cap. They do terrific work. I'm currently on their site. Next season, if they post June 1 him, right, he is a $10 million cap hit, which is sort of plausible, right? And I mean, essentially, you have to make the decision to move on from Kirk Cousins if you want to draft a quarterback because, a lot of their issues, again, stem from the fact that he takes up such a substantial amount of their cap, right? And he will for the foreseeable future. And every single year that you decide to go with him, it's sort of a +1, right? And so I don't mind them. Obviously, if Zach will, he represents, I think, a quarterback that's probably going to be picked in the top 5 by the time it's all said and done. He's playing terrifically. Trey Lance, I think there's a lot of question marks there with him. They could obviously trade up and get one of the top 2 guys, which I think are sort of slam dunks to be good prospects in the NFL. But you look at the Vikings, like there's a number of places where they need help. I mean, this draft of wide receivers, I mean, we saw it with the Gophers on Friday night. Like Rondale Moore would be terrific in an offense that had already had Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen's also not a spring chicken. You might want to also think about him, but their weapons they could use one more weapon. Irv Smith being the sort of lead tight end, Dalvin Cook at running back, and 3 brilliant wide receivers would, I think, make everybody's life easier, especially if they sort of protected their offensive line through quick passing the way that the Rams did last night and the way the Patriots did forever with Tom Brady. But you look at the defense. Like, obviously, I think Anthony Barr is probably a goner, given how good Eric Wilson's played. Kendricks is good. They're fine at safety. They're aging a little bit. They do need some players to rush the passer and to create heat up front, and they always need more corners. So there's just a lot of places to look. In my opinion, it all does start with what you said with their offensive philosophy, which I think stems from the head coach, and then obviously what to do with Kirk Cousins.
That's a point that I wanted to broach next, Eric, and it's this. So let's forget Kirk, because, I mean, Kirk is, you mentioned Kirk, and it's a lightning rod, both good and bad. As a guy who studies trends and this league continually, Eric, does what Mike Zimmer wants to do, not defensively, but offensively, does it work? And I don't care who the quarterback is. He has his philosophy. Does his desire for offensive execution that he likes to see, does it work?
Yeah, but then why spend all that money on Cousins, right? Like the whole hack of that entire situation is that you don't have to. You can have a guy like Sage at the quarterback position and still do fine, right? That's really the tricky thing. Yeah, if you're trying to run Brad Childress's offense, it was pretty clear that you needed a good quarterback to overcome a lot of Brad and Darrell Bevel's sort of misgivings. But if you think that your quarterback, your offense is quarterback proof, this is why this entire thing, I think, has been rough on the Vikings, because it was sort of like they married Cousins, right, for his stability and his and then they had this like midlife crisis, right? And Kirk, like, being sort of a steady income guy, like, he couldn't fulfill that for them, right? And so then they're trying to like live like this like incongruent life with Cousins right now. And like, I don't understand it. Like, I don't think he can be the quarterback of a team that you run this way, with a defense that is as bad as it is, with a coach who's as defensive minded as he is. All of it seems sort of like not a really good working thing for them. I don't mind having Kubiak as the offensive coordinator as long as the quarterback is sort of paid in conjunction with that approach. It's just not, and that to me is why, like, I think a lot of Vikings fans get upset with me because I'm saying, like, they were better off at 0-2 than they are now. And it's like, well, why? They've played a lot better. It's like, yeah, but they're kicking the can. Like this thing needs, I think, a substantial rebuild. And I think it starts with Kirk, even as well as Kirk has played, because he's played fine over the past, 6 to 8 weeks.
Eric, what about the defense? What do you see if Danielle Hunter gets cleared at some point and then wants a substantial pay increase and wants to be the highest paid defender, or he's going to hold out? How do you view his situation relative to the salary cap? What do you think they have defensively right now?
I don't know. I mean, part of this all comes back, but part of the promise of the Minnesota Vikings over the past 3, 4, 5 years was that they hit so well on the draft. I mean, they had, in the last years of Frazier, they had 2.5 first-round picks per year, and a lot of them ended up playing well. Rhodes was great. Harrison Smith was great. Trey Waynes was serviceable. Obviously, then they had the 2015 year when you also added Kendricks and Hunter and Diggs. And the problem is, and this is the mistake Green Bay has made, and why Green Bay has only won 1 Super Bowl with Rodgers, despite him being a transcendent talent, is that you make decisions based upon this idea that you can replicate those drafts. And there's almost no evidence in the history of NFL drafting that any team is better than any other team. It's really a crapshoot. And so the problem I have is, look, if Gladney, Dantzler, Troy Dye, all these draft picks that they have, like if they hit the way that they hit at the 2015 clip, this is all systems are a go for the Vikings. Like, they draft a quarterback and they're a Super Bowl contender again. If you have any sort of perturbation off of that high end, drafting, which we've already seen with Treadwell and Clement, like all those guys down the road. Drew Samia is a 4th round pick and he's the worst player on the team. Any sort of perturbation from that, and again, you're working off of assumptions that I think the Vikings are making, but that aren't reality, which is that, we can draft defensive players and coach them up. Well, maybe you just got lucky and drafted a bunch of players and your coaching made a 10% difference. But if these players are 20% worse, you're still not going to be able to cover that spread. And I think that's where they are. And I think that's why I say, okay, continue to draft premium positions, because that's the numbers game you have to play. And unfortunately, they think that they're a made hand already, and that's why they go for Garrett Bradbury at a sort of non-premium position. That's why they're making some moves that I think are suboptimal. Now this year they drafted a bunch of premium positions, and hopefully it works out. But I don't know. I think they have to continue to do that approach. Draft defensive backs, retain Hunter. Get a 3 technique. I think Sheldon Richardson's probably the biggest loss for them that's gone under the radar the past few years, and try to win that way. But the problem is it's going to be hard, because it's marginally more difficult to do that when you have your best defensive player and your best offensive player, both veterans, on market level deals. Usually these really smart teams like to pair quarterback and a high priced veteran if the quarterback's on a rookie deal, or a high priced quarterback and then a premium position player. So, for example, San Francisco has Jimmy Garoppolo and Nick Bosa. One of the guys is highly paid, one of the guys is on a rookie deal. Cleveland has Baker Mayfield and Myles Garrett, one guy on a rookie deal, one guy on a veteran deal. Like, that's really the analytically sound way to do it. Once you have both of those positions both paid at the top of the market, then everywhere else is a 10-team parlay that you're trying to get lucky and hit on.
It's very odd too, because it seems like, despite the fact that they have, I think, the right structure in the GM and coach, it's almost as if in the past few years that they don't necessarily work on the same page. And so Spielman's trying to accumulate, which I actually like, but then it's also like he's trying to do Mike's biting for him. And so he's trying to go out and make what you're talking about, which is immediate win now moves. And it leaves the Vikings in sort of this middle ground, which I don't get. And it's frustrating to watch, because I think a fair question is, what are you doing here? Like, what's the goal? What's the goal here? Is the goal to win a Super Bowl in 2 years? Or are you trying to win one right now? And I think if you were to pump Spielman and Zimmer full of truth serum and ask them that question, I don't know that they could tell you. It's just sort of like it's a week-to-week existence right now to me.
Well, and I messaged you guys have Courtney Cronin on a lot, and she's terrific. And I think she had the thread the other day about why they're playing Dalvin Cook so much, and having Alexander Madison on the bench. And I think Madison's a perfect example of, that was a good draft pick. They traded back a number of times. They got a running back in the back of the third round, probably could start for a number of teams. But obviously you pay Dalvin Cook, and then you start to wonder, okay, well, we're a 4-6 team. Why are we giving all these carries to Dalvin Cook in a season that's mostly lost? But then you realize the incentives. And what are the incentives? Well, they obviously went to the Wilfs and said, look, we need to pay Dalvin Cook. And the Wilfs, I think, are more than happy to do that because it gives them good press and he's a superstar player. But and I talk about this on my podcast, the PFF Forecast, for 27 to 28 teams in the NFL, it's all about building these fake trophies. It doesn't matter that we traded away 3 years of draft picks and our quarterback stinks. Khalil Mack's Defensive Player of the Year. But it's that doesn't matter because you have one of the worst franchises in the league now because of that decision. Mm-hmm. And it's for Cook, it's the same thing. It's we drafted a running back who had character concerns, a lot of question marks, got hurt in year one. We stuck with him. And now, look, he's this brilliant trophy. We have Dalvin Cook is an MVP candidate running back. And it's well, that's meaningless. You're 4-6 and you suck. And it's and some of these teams, but they make decisions to sort of puff those up. Why? Because then they could justify their existence at whether the head coach, OC, general manager. And it's always that's always kind of where I look to see is why are these teams making these kind of decisions? And it's almost always out of their incentives are a little bit different than winning the most games over the next 5 years or winning the Super Bowl, let's say in the next 10 years.
Eric, great stuff, man. Great stuff. And by the way, the PFF Forecast podcast, you can find Eric talking nerd football things on a regular basis. And we appreciate your level-headed analytical insight on the Minnesota Vikings. We'll have you on again sometime soon, man.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Happy Thanksgiving. Stay safe.
You too, man.
Thanks,
all right, Eric Eager. You can follow him on Twitter too. It's PFF Eric. And
that was a great description.
What he just said. Let's dive into that here. So meaningless trophies in the NFL, and if where my mind went right away is Adrian Peterson's 7 or 8 years in purple too. And it was actually a more, I think, strategically sound decision to build your team around a running back in 2007, 8, 9 than it is now, because you were at least still kind of on the, it was a passing era, but you were still kind of on the tail end of running back era as well. Right. Mm-hmm. And the Vikings have spent so much time over the past 15 years with great running backs, and those running backs are Dalvin Cook might be a Hall of Fame running back. Adrian Peterson's a first ballot Hall of Fame running back. But what does it matter that Adrian Peterson led the league with a 2,000-yard season in 2012? When you think back your time watching Vikings football, do you really give a crap that Adrian Peterson ran for 2,000 yards in 2012? It was fun.
Yeah, it was
fun. It was definitely one of the most fun individual performances in my life watching Vikings football.
You never felt like that team, though, had a chance to actually make a run. You didn't.
Right.
Ever.
But that dude was making at one point twice as much money as the second highest paid player at his own position. And it really hurt the Vikings' ability to go after other things that could help them.
Yes.
Offensive line. You wonder why did the offensive line erode?
You know what?
The Vikings were paying $1 million a game to Brett Favre, and they were paying Adrian Peterson $14 million a year. 10 years before anybody else made that money at that position.
So I think you could make a pretty good case that the Vikings' best strategy in the last 20 years, just the best sound, I'm not talking on one player, but I'm talking across the board. As questionable as coach as he was, and I think Longwell's the guy who has pointed this out, and maybe Sage too, but it's absolutely correct. Brad Childress was a better personnel guy than a coach. And if you recall, when he came in and identified with a bunch of cash because the Wilfs basically said, go spend. In 2006, what he did was he came in and said, our lines are bad. Offensive line, defensive line. I'm going to sign guys. Steve Hutchinson got signed. Chester Taylor, who was a good back, not a star, but really good and versatile, got signed. He went through and made a bunch of signings that solidified places where it makes sense to. So it wasn't, one big splash on one player. It was small splash here, small splash there. And that's the construction that I'm talking about. And here's where Sunday's loss, Phil, I think is so troubling, because I stand by what I said yesterday. Sunday's loss was actually the exact formula that the head coach would have chosen for that game. Think about it.
Put it all on your defense at the end.
In the fourth quarter, my offense is good enough to get us the lead. Who doesn't blow it? My defense. That's Mike's whole world. And it didn't work against Dallas, which stinks.
Twice.
Right. So the flaw there, if I was to call Mike in, I would say, Mike, how you envision this team is how that game played out exactly. It was not a blowout. It was absolutely how you told me the Viking stew is going to work. And to what you just said is exactly right. You blew that lead twice.
And he would say, well, yeah, obviously we're having a down season defensively. That's why in the draft and free agency coming up, we need to make sure that we get a 3 technique in the first round, and then we spend a 3rd round pick on a safety over here because Ant Harris has to go away and you can't franchise him again, or you probably don't want to. Like, he would say, right. So to get back to where we need to be defensively, let's spend whatever resources we have financially or draft capital wise on defensive players. Mm-hmm. And then you're sort of back to the same formula that you've been at for 7 or 8 years. And I think it's just showing you this year, when you look at what this defense was in 2017, which was the best in the NFL, and where it's eroded to in the second half of that Dallas game against that team and Andy Dalton. Mm-hmm. It shows you how impossible it is to maintain the top defense in the NFL.
Yep.
You lose players because of age.
Yep.
You lose players to free agency. You lose players to injury. It's not like, oh man, we lost a guy, plug him back in. All 10 other guys are going to be around for 5 or 10 years. You build a defense and you hope to get sort of lucky with health, age, draft picks, everything, and coaching, and have it culminate into what the 85 Bears defense became. And go look at that defense the later part of that decade. It wasn't the same. Go look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense like 3 years after 2002. Guess what? It wasn't the same, right? It was still decent, but it's you can't have all these pieces fall by the wayside and then expect to just like, oh, we'll just draft a couple more guys and sign a couple guys in free agency. That's not how it works. You're never going to be able to be the number 1 defense for like 10 straight years. It's never happened in the NFL's history.
And there is one position, there is one spot at which I can have a guy who, if he is really elite and good, can control things. Quarterback. See, the Vikings' problem is they're trying to like build a perfect defense, and they can sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's 11 human beings, right? If I get the one that works, guess what? I've got a minute 37 left on the clock at home on Sunday.
Yeah.
Guess what I'm doing? Getting into field goal position, right?
You know, the Chiefs have a lot of flaws this season. The Chiefs have had defensive flaws. The Chiefs have had some, like they drafted a rookie running back because they've had kind of a running back rotating revolving door the last 2 or 3 years. And they've had skill position players get hurt, wide receivers get hurt, right? And so you could sit there as a Chiefs fan and you could definitely point out all the different things that need to be fixed. And those things do need to be fixed, even for a Super Bowl champion team. But guess what? They got Pat Mahomes. He fixes all of it.
And that's what Reed said on Sunday.
Yep. And
he basically said, I've got Mahomes. I'm not worried late in games. Think about that.
So when we sit here and we have these conversations, even after Kirk plays because I know people are pissed at us. Like when Kirk plays the game of his life.
But I'm not blaming him.
Totally deserves credit. He was amazing in that game. He's now, by the way, nerd stat alert here, the 6th highest graded quarterback according to Pro Football Focus this year. Are there only 5 guys I would take ahead of Kirk to lead my franchise? No, there's a longer list, and most of them are mobile quarterbacks. But when we watch what happened late in that game, and the Vikings have the ball with a minute 50 left or a minute and a half left and a timeout, and they just have to get to field goal range to tie the game. Ideally, they score a touchdown. All right. When that drive fails, not necessarily because of Cousins, offensive line didn't play great on that drive, and neither did Justin Jefferson. But when that drive fails, most people turn their attention to Jefferson's drop pass. The defense blew the lead twice in the fourth quarter, and the offensive line is bad. So go fix all those things. I look at that drive, and I think you do too, and I say, Well, it's impossible to fix all of those things at the same time, because when you fix those things, then other things pop up, right? You're not going to have a perfect roster around your quarterback unless you are damn lucky. You need a quarterback that can overcome those things that aren't perfect.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
That can, oh my God, my receiver dropped a pass. I need to run for a first down on the next play.
Right.
Or, oh my God, offensive line is crowding me here because they can't keep the Dallas defensive line at bay. I need to flush and keep a play alive and throw a ball downfield.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's what I want for this franchise. And it's not to say that Kirk was bad on Sunday. It's to say that his skill set isn't good enough to overcome all the things that you guys all want to fix. You can't fix all those things at the same time.
All right, let's take Kirk out. Kirk has become too big of central focus as the problem to what is a grander problem. Let's turn our attention towards picking on Dalvin Cook, okay? Because it's not his fault. He's really good, but he's a running back. Okay. And late in games, when I'm starting at my own 25 down by 3, guess who doesn't really give me a lot at that point? My highly paid running back. It's why the Chiefs went and drafted one, because you know what they said? We got this guy for cheap for 4 or 5 years. This is great. Dalvin Cook is a marvelous player. But again, instead of picking on individuals by name, let's pick on positions by puzzle fit. Okay. The Vikings are putting together a puzzle, and now we're to the key pieces. We're to the middle. It's Thanksgiving night, and the family's fighting, and they're putting together a puzzle, and they're sick of each other, and they're full, and they're not comfortable, but they've got this damn puzzle, and it's right to the middle, and now pieces don't fit. Okay, the pieces are beautiful, like they look really nice. It's an ocean, but they don't fit. This is where we are with the Vikings offense as a whole. So forget Cook's name and forget Cousins' name. But think about what you saw on Sunday, and it's 2020 now, and things have changed. And this is why and this does not make him a bad coach, but I keep coming back to is what Mike Zimmer wants to do a fit in the league he now coaches in. Because you literally had this Dalvin Cook, your most important player, beyond a shadow of a doubt offensively, who was helpless, basically, to do anything. And now it all goes on Kirk. Every bit of it goes on Kirk. And can you do this? And Jefferson drops that ball. But you know what? There's also the 2 errant passes for Thielen, which weren't great. I mean, the one I think could have been caught, but probably not. That's why I think the conversation here is, and this is why I don't get it, because Spielman and Zimmer, I don't think they're bad at what they do, but I can't really tell what they're doing and if they're on the same page, because the priority of how to build a team now, I think is pretty clear. Like, I don't think it's a grand or some big secret, but how the Vikings are doing it doesn't really make sense. And that's not to pick on people. That's to pick on construction.
Yeah. And here's another thing. And I'm sure you heard some of the same stuff, in our evaluation on Ventline on Sunday and in the follow-up Monday. When I brought up the 168 fourth quarter comebacks in the NFL the last 3 years stat, the Vikings have won 160. So that's an average. Someone did the math on that. It's like an average of 2 per team per season or something. And the Vikings have 1. So they should have 6 on average. The better teams like the Bills have 9 or 10 over those 3 years. When I said the better teams at coming back in the fourth quarter, like the Bills have like 10 of them. The main rebuttal I got back was, well, maybe you should try holding on to a lead in the fourth quarter instead of having to come back from down. Well, let's go down that path. 2 things. Like, it's all a circle, right? All right. Well, show me the path to a better defense. Let's push that rock back up that hill. All right. We're going to build the number 1 defense again. Got to nail all these draft picks. Got to devote all this cap space to all these guys, Sheldon Richardson, all this stuff, right? So that would be one way. Yep. Build a better defense that holds on to leads in the fourth quarter. Which it's just not super realistic. The other thing is, even with a decent defense, it is the NFL. Teams blow leads in the fourth quarter. They go back and forth. It's not realistic to score the first touchdown and hold on to the lead for 3 hours. Like, that's not how it works.
Sure.
Especially when you face good quarterbacks. Guess what? Russell Wilson, he's probably going to punch back in the fourth quarter. Just a hunch. Matt Ryan, even on a bad team, is probably going to punch back a little in the second half because he's got pride and he's a former MVP. And so whether you have the 32nd ranked defense or the first ranked defense, you're going to find yourself in spots where you are now trailing in the fourth quarter.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't the Vikings win games when they're trailing in the fourth quarter? Because systematically, running back, play action, offensive line is not elite. All these different reasons. The quarterback isn't mobile. Like, I would rather have a team that's kind of flawed a little bit between like the first quarter and the third quarter and maybe isn't the best defensive team. But you know what? In a league where close games are the regular thing and there's 2 minutes on the clock, I've got it down. Whether that's because I have a mobile quarterback or I've just got a system that plays toward throwing the ball without having to leverage play action. I'd rather have that with a bunch of other flaws than a team that looks damn great for 3 hours up until there's 2 minutes to go and then can't find itself and has no idea how to cross the 50-yard line.
You at the very least need to feel like you have a chance to come back late. And right now the Vikings do not.
Yep.
Like you need to at least go into that drive against the Cowboys at the end there with the feeling that it's very realistic to at least get into field goal range to tie the score. And then if something goes wrong, it goes wrong. But the problem is Tennessee, Seattle, and now this game, it's felt basically futile. And that it can't feel futile. It can't feel that way. That's not how this league operates. But yeah, they are. The thing that would scare me the most is that Mike Zimmer basically in a lot of ways on Sunday got his ideal game and you still lost. And you lost because of the unit that he thinks is always going to win. And I mean, Chris Jones literally watched a man run by him. Like you can't have that, but you had it. So what's your response?
Yep. So a lot to unpack here.
And just the lastly, the smart ass comment of like, well, why don't you stay ahead? Why don't you not blow the lead? Isn't the whole point of the stat of the fourth quarter comeback is because you were down? So we have to come back. That's like saying, well, the Twins only have one walk-off out of 500 in Major League Baseball. Well, why can't we get one walk-off then?
Because the other team is full of professionals and all pros too.
But
maybe not Dallas.
But the problem with what you both are saying is Zimmer's comeback would be what the smart Alec comment is, which is we shouldn't ever blow that lead.
But you're going to.
I know.
Yeah.
So
but
you don't have to retake the lead. Someone said, well, Kirk, I'm going to leave Kirk's name out of it because Kirk was great on Sunday.
Okay.
All right. But the Vikings offense, somebody came back and said the Vikings offense took the lead twice in the fourth quarter. So what do you say to that? And I say, well, they had time to do it the third time. They should have done it the third time.
They had a lot of time, actually.
And the offense is much better this season than the defense. And so when there's a game in the balance and I'm going to pin it on one or the other, and there's still 2 minutes left on the clock, the offense's work isn't done. Oh, well, we already did this twice. Screw this.
Actually, I got news
Score
for
again.
Dallas. Their work was done.
Well,
their work was done. Unfortunately, against Tennessee, Seattle, and Dallas, their work was done.
All right, that's a wrap on this episode of Purple Daily. Our work is not done. We're going to keep pumping out episodes this holiday week, and we'll be here for you right after the Vikings and maybe Teddy Bridgewater if he's healthy, if he's playing. Little clash.
He's still in my heart.
Vikings vent line. And you can check out last week's episode on Sunday too. Apple, Spotify, scorenorth.com as part of the Purple Daily podcast. And thanks to everyone for subscribing to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Purple Daily Podcast.